Capitol Insight is designed to give you some insight into the folks who are featured in our state capitol here in Salem, the leaders in state government and those who are involved in state government. I'm pleased to tell you that our guest today is our Labor Commissioner, Mary Wendy Roberts. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Very well. Pleased that you could join us today. This is designed to give our viewers some idea about you as a person and as a political leader. We try to set it up so it's in a more informal setting and it gives you a chance to talk in more than sound bites about some of the issues.
That's wonderful.
So let me take you back. I'd like to shift quickly to not your current role as Labor Commissioner, but Mary Wendy Roberts, the person, and ask you a little bit about your background. I understand you're a fifth-generation Oregonian.
That's right. And I've loved to explore my roots all over the state. My great-great-grandfather came to Oregon in a covered wagon and settled out in eastern Oregon and was elected Justice of the Peace out there.
Did he start out, well, if he was Justice of the Peace, were they Democrats and Republicans in those days?
Yes, and he was a Democrat.
So you've stayed true to the family heritage?
Absolutely. And I love to go out there and into Harney County and find the old area that he lived in, and this is great.
Well, as you've studied those roots, some people look for genealogy and all of that. How far back east do those roots go, do you know, or have you found that out?
Well, actually, I found out that they go back to colonial America, and it's been fascinating. And I think, like most Americans, I found out that I have a variety of strains of English and Scotch and Welsh and Irish and German and just everything. It's just fascinating.
Well, with a variety of roots like that, you're probably well entrenched. And I'd like to find out, where are those roots placed now in Oregon? Where did you grow up?
Well, actually, I grew up in Portland. I went to Portland grade schools, and then I went to West Lynn. My parents were divorced when I was 11 years old, and my younger sister and I moved with my mother to West Lynn. And she was a school teacher, and she supported us by being a school teacher at Oregon City High Schools. But she wanted us to go to be in the West Lynn School District so we wouldn't be the teacher's kid at school, which I appreciated.
Oh, that's good.
So I graduated from West Lynn. And
I'm going to stop you there, though. You mentioned your mom. She was a school teacher.
Right.
And your dad was our State Senator Frank Roberts.
Yes, he's State Senator Frank Roberts, and he was a college professor at the time. You can see how I could not escape understanding the value of education.
Well, now, your grandfather, who came out, the Justice of the Peace, that was on your mother's side of the family?
My great-grandfather.
Great-grandfather.
Right,
Great-grandfather.
fifth generation. But I had another one that was also on my mother's side, a great-grandfather that was the sheriff of Bandon, Oregon, over on the coast. So...
So you have public officials on your mother's side as well as on your father's side.
I guess it's a family tradition, really.
Do you find
public service?
Do people get confused sometimes because of the family name, with Frank Roberts being prominent in state politics?
Well, I've only been called Frank once.
Well, how about on the women's side? I mean, there is some, at least I've heard comments sometimes. Barbara Roberts is now your stepmother, I guess, if you go back, although she didn't marry Frank until years later.
Right. Well, actually, it was interesting because when I was elected to the House in 1972, my father was running that year, but unfortunately did not get reelected. But in 1974, when I was elected to the state Senate, he was also elected the same year to the state Senate. And his former wife, Betty Roberts, who was his second wife, was in the state Senate at the same time. And that was a little confusing.
Now let's add to the confusion. In 1972, you were elected to the Oregon House.
Right. Youngest
woman ever elected to the House.
That's right.
And I think you still hold that record.
I think so.
We can check the ages at some point. But in '74, you ran for the Senate. And you defeated, in the primary, Lonnie Roberts.
Yes.
Who is no relation whatsoever.
No, not at all. But when I was, people asked me about it, and I said, well, I don't think it was on the name familiarity of Mary. It was, it was a lot of hard work. It always is, I think, as you know, in politics. And now whenever I see Lonnie and Roberts in the Capitol, I just say, hi, cousin, and we laugh about it. So And that was the year in 1974, after I won the primary, I also got the Republican nomination by write-in, so that was nice.
Covered both bases.
Yeah, well.
Well, taking you back to that first House term, as I understand it, you served on Ways and Means.
Yes.
I mean, this is incredible to me for a freshman to be able to serve on Ways and Means, the Money Committee, which money means power. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, in 1972, there were a lot of new people elected to the legislature, and I argued that my experience as having worked in state government, I had been a social worker, and then I'd also worked for Multnomah County as a juvenile court counselor, that kind of background, being on the line, would enable me to have some insight, if I were on Ways and Means, into governmental operations, and particularly how to do things better, perhaps, with less money. And so I was put on Ways and Means, and it was probably because I was gutsy enough to ask, I think. And I didn't know that freshmen just didn't get those kinds of assignments, but I did. And it was quite an education. I learned a lot.
Was your service on Ways and Means generally the most memorable event of your first session as a member of the legislature?
I think so. That was, of course, a very interesting session, since it was my first one, and I was filled with idealism and amazement that I was there, and I was very thrilled to continue to work on those issues I've been concerned about before in private life, and I was particularly interested in children's issues, and I was an advocate for better funding for child care.
Well, you also mentioned that we were talking a little while back about there was a special unit that was developed at the state hospital for children and adolescents. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, well, the secure treatment unit for emotionally disturbed children and adolescents at Oregon State Hospital was something that that's one of the things I'm perhaps the most proud of helping bring about when I was in the legislature.
Did this carry over from your time in the House as well as to your time in the Senate? Because you served from 74 to 78 in the Senate?
Yes. Basically what happened was that there was a request to get a unit to deal with the very severely disturbed children, the ones that are dangerous to themselves or others, and there was no secure place in the state outside of a correctional setting or an adult hospital ward for these kids. And so a lot of them were being sent out of state, which was extremely costly. They didn't get to see their parents, which would be part of any therapeutic plan. And in addition to that, we weren't really, as a state, understanding how to treat these kids. So the emergency board unfortunately turned down the initial request. I went back and begged to give them another chance, and then we worked together to get that request more meaningful and talked about the real kids that were affected. So we got that approval, and then I got to be, in Ways and Means, when I was in the state Senate, I was fortunate to get a chairmanship. Actually, I was sharing the chairmanship because I was, again, it was unusual for a freshman senator to chair a subcommittee, so I had Debs Potts became my co-chair, and he sat there to make sure I didn't get out on a limb or something. But it was the Human Resources Subcommittee, and we got the request for funding, and they came in and requested the funding for the children's unit, and I said, where's your request for the adolescents? Asked them to add that on, and so we could get it started as a complete program for both children and adolescents, and found the money to fund it out of the other budgets, and then it became a reality. And I also picked Oregon State Hospital as the siting for it in the Building 40, and went out, and so I mean, I just felt like it was really, I felt like it was my baby. I mean, this was, I was there throughout it, and helped establish pick the first director, and went out and made sure that the program got started right. And now it's the linchpin for the whole system for services in mental health for kids, because it's the other places can take kids knowing that if they have a psychotic episode, that they have the backup of the secure treatment unit with the crisis beds. And I was very proud of that, and it made it all worthwhile, all the campaigning and so forth, to say, well, if I do nothing else, I can look at that. But of course, I did a few other things.
Well, you should be proud of that in the sense that, one, there's an early focus there on what I'll call children's issues and mental health issues coming together. But you can almost treat it as something of a legacy, I would think, because you can look now at the unit and at the operation and realize, hey, that's something that, you know, looking from your perspective, that's something that I put together and ought to feel good.
Well, it was fun to go back, and they asked me to come back and speak at the, I think it was the 10th anniversary or something, and that was a thrill to see that the building was still there, the program was still there, and have kids come up and say, I was in here and now I'm an adult and I'm okay. It was very touching.
Well, that's great. Well, then you shifted. You're in the Senate from 74 to 78. And in 1978 you ran for Labor Commissioner.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that race?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that in the legislature I had served in the Senate on the Senate Labor Committee and had become acquainted with a lot of issues that were relevant to the Labor Commissioner job. Apprenticeship task force, and had been involved in legislation, including the one that the bill that banned tip credit in Oregon, that made sure that if you tip a waitress, that money is not going to offset her minimum wage. It's actually going to be beyond a minimum wage salary. I had also been involved in various civil rights issues, including, of course, remember the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, and other issues involving civil rights, like I sponsored the bill and spearheaded its passage to ban discrimination on the basis of pregnancy, which at that time was not considered a form of sex discrimination because they treated it as a physical condition. Well, no, the U.S. Supreme Court had ruled in a case where an employer had argued that their discriminatory treatment against pregnant workers was okay. They'd bought their argument that they would have treated pregnant men the same way, therefore it wasn't sex discrimination to have that kind of policy. I mean, it was ludicrous. So we had to get a bill through the Oregon legislature that said in Oregon pregnancy discrimination is against the law. So these kinds of things, I think, led me naturally to be considered for Labor Commissioner. And so when the incumbent announced 5 days before the filing deadline that he wasn't going to run, my phone started ringing, and I hadn't even thought about it. But it was a natural, and so I did run, and I wasn't expected to win, frankly, but I did. That was in 1978.
Who was your opponent in 78?
Well, actually there were 8 of us in the primary. The COPE director for the FL-CIO, Ralph Groner, who was the nephew of Senator Dick Groner, who had been chairman of the Senate Labor Committee. And to tell you the truth, it was a good campaign because it was a clean campaign. This is the days of campaigning, I think, that we now refer to as the good old days. And it was done with dignity, and afterwards we all were friends, and could feel good about the race. It was exciting. And in the middle of it all, you know what happened? I don't know if you remember this.
No, I don't. See, now I was living in an apolitical life. I was commuting to Portland in 78 actually. Takes me back to the days when I was in Guam. I was an assistant attorney general at the time, so I was gone from Oregon for 2 years, 77 to 79. So I can claim to have missed all this excitement.
Well, what happened was that I was rushed to the hospital, and my husband and I did not realize it, but I had a tubal pregnancy, and I almost died. I was within, they said it was within 20 minutes, potentially, of death when they brought me in because I had lost so much blood. And I had, what was ironic is I was preparing to get on a plane to Pendleton. If I'd gotten on that plane, I wouldn't be here today. You would have been too far from the necessary medical services. So it was in many ways it was a soap opera, dramatic time of life. But that was in 78, and I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because I need to tell our audience that you're with us on Capitol Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and our guest today is our Labor Commissioner, Mary Wendy Roberts.
I'd like to mention to you that if you have any comments or concerns that you'd like to pass on, please write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And we'll return now to Mary Wendy Roberts. Well, we've picked up with, we were talking about 1978, and since we're about halfway through, I want to make sure I cover your career as Labor Commissioner. Tell me, you were elected in '78. Since that time, what are some of the main themes of your work as Labor Commissioner?
Well, I think that one main theme, certainly the first thing I had to deal with when I came into the agency, was that the agency was facing a $250,000 over expenditure. There was no encumbrance system, and they, when the books were audited at my request, we found out that there was going to be a $250,000.
What a great way to start.
And I thought, oh, well, I think I better clear this up right away. And I also there were other management problems. There was a huge backlog of civil rights cases, some of which were 7 years old, and the investigation had not been complete. And there were over 1,600 cases. There were a few other problems like that. So the first thing I did was that I reorganized the agency, streamlined the processes, cleared up the backlog, and then I began to get beyond a lot of the administrative and management concerns. And I developed an expanded technical assistance program so that employers and others would have information about how to comply with the law, because I think part of law enforcement is to put the information out and make sure people understand how they can comply. It's education. And that those technical assistance seminars now serve 6,000 employers a year or so, and we have...
some of my staff, by the way, from my law firm have attended some of your seminars.
Great,
so
great.
We all make use of them.
Good, and the thing that's exciting about those is now, it started out as general funded, and now it's all funded by fees. It's entirely self-supporting. So we're talking $400,000 to $500,000 that is not general fund. It's self-supporting. We run it like a business, and I think if it weren't working, we wouldn't be bringing in the money to pay for it.
Your staff selects excellent speakers too. I'm just saying it tongue-in-cheek because I've been one of the speakers at those programs.
But anyway, that was one thing, and the next thing was we wanted to get the cases not only moving, but we wanted to have the hearings that would get some precedents on the books. We did that. We put in legislation. We got child labor law reform. We put teeth in the child labor law, because the Labor Commissioner enforces not only all the civil rights laws, including the laws against sexual harassment, by the way, and I know that's a hot topic
these days.
But also all the wage and hour laws, including child labor laws and overseas apprenticeship. So there's a lot to do. But the child labor area, of course, and you can recognize my old concerns as a former juvenile court counselor and social worker and interested in children. There was no penalty if you'd employed a child in Oregon and you employed them illegally, perhaps even putting them in danger. Maybe they were even injured. There was no child labor law penalty beyond saying, well, we'll take away your right to hire a minor. And of course, some of them didn't have that right to begin with. So we put the teeth in that law, and that helped us when we were dealing with the door-to-door candy sale scams a few years back, where we actually drove those folks out of the state. They were exploiting children, and
we should say quickly that the scams were actual businesses that were having kids out there selling candy, but not the real non-profits like the Girl Scouts or Cub Scouts or whatever.
It was not the non-for-profit, not the church or charitable organizations. These are people who had kids as young as 9, which was illegal, out door to door, and you open the door, and there'd be this kid in the rain all by themselves, this waif with big eyes, and you're going to buy a candy bar, right?
Yeah, and these kids were really employees, and this was child labor, as opposed to kids in some club.
And kids were not being provided transportation home in some cases. They had to walk home late at night. One kid walked like 92 blocks at night, a little girl. It was amazing that there were no deaths in the state, and after we drove these folks out, basically, you know, finding them guilty of dozens and dozens, I think it was about 90-some violations, and fought them all the way through the court system. They left the state. They went to Idaho, where they didn't have the same laws. A similar operation took an Oregon kid up into the state of Washington to do that, and a child died. So this was serious. These kids also, sometimes if they didn't sell their quota, they wouldn't be given dinner. That was incredible. Okay, another one was as you recall, the migrant labor reform package that we pushed through in 1989. Remember, that's when you might have seen this. I was out in all these out in all these migrant labor camps.
I remember.
With showing the conditions and saying, you know.
So you're taking me to my freshman term as a House member when you talk 89, and I was on the Labor Committee, so I got to see all. And
we took legislators out, and we took camera crews out, we took the press out, and we said, look. And the public was rightfully outraged, and we were able to mobilize support and working with groups as diverse as the Farm Bureau, the Nurserymen's Association, Oregon Legal Services, the Hispanic Commission, the Ecumenical Ministries, representatives from the Catholic Archdiocese that, of course, through their community programs, you know, we're trying to help with social services to the migrants.
While we're talking about that, I'm going to pause for a moment again and say to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. Our guest today is Labor Commissioner Mary Wendy Roberts. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix, your host here in Salem. And if you have any questions or concerns or comments, whatever, please feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. And now we're out there in the fields taking a look at the conditions for the migrant labor workers.
Well, I felt so good about this because it became the issue that wouldn't die. I mean, it was in newspapers throughout the state, and the responsible growers and others that saw the situation needed attention because there were a lot of migrant workers coming into the state, and there didn't seem to be a plan, you know, as to how to deal with the situation, and a lot of them were coming without adequate housing, and some of them didn't find jobs right away.
So your first job was, one, is you brought attention to the issue.
Right.
Two, you sensitized people to the depth and the breadth of the issue. And then three, you started working with all of these groups to galvanize an action plan, something that people could focus on.
Right. And we got a package of legislation introduced at the legislature, and which was, of course, massaged and improved upon and modified. And we got through migrant labor reform that tightened up the regulations on farm labor contractors who, many of them had been unscrupulous and exploiting these people, depriving them of their wages. We also got the registration required and licensing, basically, for folks who are involved in running the labor camps. We got a lot of stiffer laws and protections. And we also, I think, got attention focused on agriculture in the state because, you know, it's not just a social issue. There's also the economics of having a pool of labor for agriculture and making sure that that supply is not either too large, which creates social problems, or too little, which creates economic problems for the farmers.
So you've got this balance to strike. Now I'd like to shift you to another area where you've also tried to help us strike a balance. There were three issue areas, actually, that are interconnected: pregnancy, disability leave, and then parental leave, and then also family medical leave, all of which have been hot issues the last few years, and you've been a leader in presenting these issues. And let's go back to pregnancy, disability leave, and parental leave, those first two. Well, you started out with parental leave, didn't you?
Yeah. And
that was before my time in the legislature,
yeah,
in 87.
And actually, I want to make it clear, this was not, I did not introduce the bill. It was introduced in the legislature because of it was the commission, I think it was the Child Care Commission, that was interested in that. And but our agency provided a great deal of the testimony and support, and we did urge that bill be passed, and I personally did myself in the lobbying.
Now, the parental leave allows a new parent to have time off from work to be able to take care of the child, and you've implemented rules to enforce that.
We enforce the law, and in fact, that's a law that I think we've been able to show really works in Oregon. And I was very proud that there was a study of 4 states, including Oregon, and that study was funded by the Ford Foundation and done by the Work and Families Institute of New York, that showed that Oregon is one of the most successful states in the way that we have implemented that law and gotten the word out. 69% of biological mothers in the survey knew about the law and their rights under it. Parents can take up to 12 weeks for the birth or adoption of a child under 6. They can split the leave, and they have a job guarantee. They cannot be discriminated against because they've chosen to take that time to be with their newborn or their newly adopted child. And the pregnancy...
well, let me stop you for a minute, because we have about 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure we cover this quickly. Pregnancy disability leave, you came full circle on this in the sense that, one, you recognized before you didn't want women discriminated against because they were pregnant.
Right.
On the other hand, you wanted to give them, you supported the notion that they should have a right to protect themselves and protect their pregnancy by, if their physician confirmed that there were certain jobs that they shouldn't do. So tell us quickly about that.
Basically, we felt that they could move to a less strenuous position or could take a leave if it was to be a danger to the fetus or to themselves. And that's simply recognizing, not special treatment, but recognizing that it's a medical need like any other and has to be accommodated. And obviously, we're all concerned about that.
I was happy to work with you and your staff on that in my freshman term as a member of the Labor Committee in the House. But then in the 91 session, we had a new issue, which is family medical leave.
This one was my bill. Ever since 1984, when I developed a Work and Families task force to study these issues, and we were sort of ahead of the curve. You know, we were work and family concerned before it was cool. You know, but this was the biggie, and that was 1991 session. We got the family medical leave through, which provides that people can take time off to care for a critically, seriously ill family member, a parent, parent-in-law, spouse, or child.
Now, and on the child side, I want to quickly add that we also added the provision that an ordinary illness for a child that's unanticipated, a parent can stay at home and take care of that child.
That's right, for home care. So if you're rushing out to work and your child suddenly says, as mine has, and I'm a single parent of a 10-year-old, has, you know, Mommy, I'm really sick, and you can't leave them, and you can't get a babysitter at that point, so you shouldn't lose your job over any of those circumstances.
Well, we had quite a push and pull, particularly since we had a Democratic Senate and a Republican House to work this through. Somehow,
That's right.
somehow we succeeded.
This was not easy, and as you remember, toward the end, somebody said, "Your bill is dead, Roberts," and I said, "It's not over till the Labor Commissioner sings." But we finally made it, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Now we have a minute left, and as we're wrapping up Capitol Insight, I have to ask you about this. We're heading into an election year. You've been Labor Commissioner since '78. You've been in politics as an elected official since '72. What about Mary Wendy Roberts in 1992?
Well, I formed an exploratory committee for Secretary of State. I have not announced, but I'm certainly seriously exploring that. And I've been traveling around the state in response to really the closest thing I've ever seen to a draft. You know, and you know how that's hard to resist as an elected official. And I think I'm really serious about this.
Will we find out in the next couple of months? Stay tuned?
Stay tuned, but I'd say within the next 3 weeks you'll know.
All right. Well, we'll sit on the edge of our seats. I'd like to thank you for joining me today, and I'd like to thank our audience for joining us on Capitol Insight. We hope that you'll join us again, and we'll continue to present to you very interesting, in fact, very challenging guests involved in state government. Thank you for joining us.